Welcome to the 128 plus MCAT Cars Bootcamp. This series of lessons is designed for students struggling to improve their CARS score. CARS is one of those sections on the MCAT that kind of difficult to handle. It's difficult to navigate, at least in a traditional sense, when compared to the other three sections, the Chem Phys, the Biochem, and the Psychology Sociology sections. Those might be a little bit more amenable to traditional study methods, where students might be able to get a high score simply by reviewing the content of the material and knowing that inside out. For CARS, however, it's a little bit different because it is purely a self-contained section. The critical analysis and reasoning aspect of it is sort of restricted or constrained to just the passages that are associated with each set of questions. And so when we're talking about how to improve CARS, it's not as straightforward as how to improve on your other sections. But hopefully with this course, we'll be able to impart some kind of workflow, some kind of strategy, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive or not as it might not make sense at times, or it might not be so obvious that there are some things that you should do when you're studying for CARS. And hopefully by employing those strategies, you'd be able to see the improvement and achieve the score that you've set for yourself as your goal. So without further ado, let's jump into the first part of this course, which is an introduction to CARS and a general overview of what the section looks like. I'm sure if you're serious about taking the MCAT, you probably know some of this information by now, but we have to do our due diligence and make sure that everything gets communicated in a way that is digestible for students of all different skill levels, and regardless of where you're at in your preparation, this boot camp will be right for you. So the CARS section is assessed competitively for many notable MD programs in Canada. Some schools like McMaster and the University of Calgary, these two schools, for example, make it very clear that the CARS score by itself is something that they value and that they take into consideration in their admissions algorithm, if you will. For example, McMaster pretty much comes out and says that the CARS score comprises 1/3 of their pre-interview score, and the University of Calgary is a little bit more ambiguous, but it's been well established in their blogs and also in the medical admissions community that the CARS score is an important aspect that they take into account when they're calculating your pre-interview score as well. Other Canadian MD programs might not assess the CARS section as specifically as these two schools, but nonetheless, it's still taken into account. For example, Western will have a cutoff for the CARS section. In previous years, it was 127, it might be 128 now, because with all the competition that's steadily mounting, increasing year after year. So the cutoff, the threshold for the CARS section can only get higher as the years go by. The University of Ottawa, for example, also has a strong aspect of their admissions criteria placed on CARS, and the University of Toronto as well. They have a sort of cutoff system going as well. Their threshold is a little bit lower, but nonetheless, it is important for you to get as high of a score as possible on this section and also on your other 3 sections of the MCAT in order to be more competitive, because your fellow peers will definitely be hitting all those high metrics that you want to be able to match, at least be able to compete with them. The MCAT is pretty much all critical reading, even the other 3 sections, the science-based sections. But however, CARS is a dedicated section for critical reading and analysis. So, in the other 3 sections, you might be able to get away with a little less work on your passage reading skills by studying the first principles of the scientific concepts. For example, you'd still be able to get a good number of questions, and those knowledge would also translate into the passage-based questions as well. Sometimes if you're a little bit stuck and can't find a certain piece of evidence in the passage, if you have a wide breadth of knowledge in those science sections, you'd still be able to scrape through. But for CARS, it's a little bit different. For CARS, all the information, the evidence, the arguments that you need to analyze and reason with are all self-contained within the passage. And so each set of questions on the MCAT CARS section, which consists of 54 questions, each passage would have a total of maybe from 7 to 9 questions associated with them, and those questions are strictly linked to the passage at hand. And so you wouldn't be able to kind of rely on your background knowledge for those questions and for this section in general. This is not to say that maybe sometimes you might know a little bit about the literature that the passage happens to be discussing, or a little bit of the history, art, humanities. You might be able to scrape through a little bit some of that, but that's near and far between. You can't really rely on that. And so you really need to be able to analyze the passages in a way that helps you to identify the correct answers for the questions that are associated with that passage in and of itself, contained within itself. And so that's why we need to dedicate review towards the CARS section of the exam, because it's important that you learn the skills that you need to be able to excel in this section. So each passage is from 500 to 600 words long. Some might be a little bit shorter, some might be a little bit longer, but the average, you could safely say, would be around 500, 550 words, which is, depending on how fast of a reader you are, that might be on the longer side, or that might be on the shorter side. Everybody's at a different level, but that's okay. So this course is meant to be able to help people who might read a little bit slower catch up, and the students who read a little bit faster to be more accurate with their answers. Each passage comes with maybe 3 to 4 paragraphs. Again, this varies. Some passages might be 5 or 6 paragraphs, it might be a little bit longer, although you'll very rarely see any passages with less than 3 paragraphs. That's very rare. So the general strategy that we recommend you to do in terms of budgeting your time in each section is to spend 2 to 3 minutes reading each passage from the beginning. From the beginning to the end of the passage takes you about maybe 2.5 minutes on average to go through. And so that might be not a lot of time for you. And when you're reading for the first time a passage, it's better to sort of skim through it, get all the main ideas, get the main gist of the passage, rather than focusing on each little detail that you come across is a better use of those 2 to 3 minutes. And when you're reading it, or when you're skimming it, however way you decide to go about it, you should prioritize your comprehension. And what that means is you need to be sure that you fully understand what the passage is talking about and how they're communicating it to you as the audience. because those pieces of information would be invaluable, very useful for you when you are spending the next maybe 6 to 7 minutes answering the question. Some of those questions will directly ask you about the main idea and the tone of the author, for example, and that comes from comprehending or understanding the passage completely. And so that's why we encourage you to prioritize comprehension when you are going through these passages. Here are some resources that would be useful for your for all your CARS practice needs. So the Princeton Review, Hyperlearning, UWorld, Kaplan, Jack Weston, Blueprint, Khan Academy, and the AAMC official practice sets and full lengths, obviously. So for the purposes of accurate practice and representative passages and questions, from top to bottom, we of course recommend the AAMC official sets first and foremost, because they come directly from the test administrators, and so they'd be the most accurate. Their questions and passages would be the most representative of what you would see on the actual MCAT test on your test day. But we understand that there is a limited amount of that resource available. If you buy the official practice sets for CARS and also all the full lengths available, you want to be able to save that and pace yourself going through those valuable resources, those valuable practice sets. You spread them out throughout your review session or your practice period. So you don't want to do them all at the beginning or all at the end, for example. So you got to pace yourself with those resources. And so the next most representative and useful resource, the third-party resource, I would say, is UWorld. You guys might have read in the pre-med forums or maybe heard from your friends and fellow applicants that the UWorld sets are uncharacteristically difficult, that they're not representative of the actual difficulty level of the AAMC test, which is kind of true. However, the UWorld CARS section, the reasoning, and even though the questions in the passages, might be a little bit longer, might be a little bit more of a difficult read through, and the questions themselves might be difficult to sort of pinpoint the evidence that you need to answer each of them, but the reasoning that they provide behind which of their answer choices are correct and which are incorrect is very similar to the reasoning that the AAMC employs. And so that's why that would be the second resource that I would recommend you to look to if you've either exhausted your AAMC practice sets or you want to spread them out more throughout your practice session. And then the other resources, you could sort of pick your poison, pick and choose between any of them. Jack Weston, for example, is really good if you just want to do like a quick daily practice, have those daily passages that you can spend maybe 10-15 minutes on reading and then answering those 6 to 9 questions that they have associated with it. And so that's kind of like very well suited towards passive learning. Kaplan, the Princeton Review, those are excellent resources as well. However, they sort of come with a hefty price tag. You sort of got to purchase them as well. And if you purchase like their entire suite of courses, that can add up, and not everybody might have the resources to be able to access that. So leave that up to your discretion. If you feel like you need more practice, you can definitely go for them as well. They're excellent resources. In terms of free resources, Khan Academy is good as well. And Blueprint. Blueprint, I believe, is a little bit more of an affordable option outside of Kaplan and the Princeton Review. But all of these resources would ultimately be useful towards you. It's just that we recommend the AAMC official sets, followed by UWorld, because those two are the most representative and the most useful. They'll be the most useful for you when you're preparing for your actual test day. So outside of those dedicated practice, there's something that we like to call passive practice. And this is sort of practicing on your own time, not reading a passage, expecting to answer those 6 to 9 questions, right? You're not reading a passage. So in passive practice, you're not reading in order to answer questions, right? You're reading in order to just improve your critical reading skills. And so there are certain things that, certain works or pieces that we recommend to our students. For example, first and foremost, we recommend you to read short essays by prominent linguists or philosophers, or even authors like literary authors, Dostoevsky, Jane Austen, for example, or philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Rene Descartes. Even writings by, for example, Isaac Newton. That's more geared towards math and science, but for cars as well, any reading is good practice, because ultimately what you're trying to do is to be able to widen your breadth of understanding on all different sorts of subjects. And so this type of critical reading, this type of background reading, would be a very useful thing for most students who have trouble skimming through passages and understanding the core of what they're trying to say. Secondly, we recommend our students also to read magazines, journal articles, both scientific and also non-scientific. Try to find art history journals that you could read from. These are in addition to the short essays by prominent linguists or philosophers. These articles tend to be a lot more of an easier read. They might not be as convoluted as some of the philosophical writings, and for good reason too, because they are geared towards a lay audience, a wider audience. But you will find these articles, these types of writings, also as passages on the MCAT cars section. And so it would be a good idea for you to get acquainted at least, or better yet, familiarize yourself with how these articles are laid out in terms of their structure, also in terms of the language that they use, right? And so this type of background reading, this type of passive practice, as we like to call it, you could do maybe once, or actually not once. Once would be a little bit too infrequent. We would say maybe 3 to 5 short essays, 3 to 5 articles per week, in addition to your dedicated practice. And that would greatly improve your critical reading and reasoning, and also analysis skill when it comes to your actual test. This is tried and tested by myself and a lot of our tutors as well, scored well on the MCAT car section. We've sort of just pioneered this kind of approach. It's not very structured, as you might say, but it is a sort of meant to be a more passive kind of training for you. And lastly, or next, I should say, with the advent of artificial intelligence, language learning models such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, we also encourage you to use or leverage these tools to practice, to further enhance or expand your practice. You can use these tools to create passages, generate them de novo, right? Feed them some example passages from your AAMC practice sets or from your UWorld practice sets, and then telling it to use these as a template to generate unseen passages, right? So that gives you a little bit of extra resources to practice with. You could also ask them to generate practice questions, again, giving them example representative questions from your tests, your practice tests that you're already doing, and they will generate practice questions in relation or along with the passages that they generate. And then that's another source of questions for you to lean on when you are preparing for the MCAT car section. And also, last but not least, you can also use them to troubleshoot your mistakes. And when you're going through the questions and you find that you've answered some of them incorrectly and you're not quite sure why your reasoning was incorrect or what was lacking in your analysis that made you come to that conclusion, you could also use these LLMs to help you troubleshoot. And usually these are very good tools. They'll explain it to you in a way that you understand. And if they don't, you could ask them to. You could literally ask them to explain it to you in simpler terms, or in more, I guess, layman terms if they become too wordy or too verbose for your liking. So these are very versatile tools for you guys to use and leverage as well in your practice. So this is a sample practice schedule that we've put together for the average student preparing to take their MCAT CARS. Doesn't matter if you're taking it for the first time or your fourth or fifth time. This is the structure, the practice schedule structure that we recommend to most of our students. Obviously, you feel free to tweak these hours around based on your own availabilities and how you feel as you approach your test. But as a general rule of thumb, we like to suggest that every student start with 2 to 3 hours of reading literature with intention. You could do this, every day, every 2 days, or if you really don't have that much time on your hands, you could prioritize it every week, but just maybe expand that 2 to 3 hours a little bit. And reading literature with intention means, again, seeking out those short essays, those literary works by the linguists, the authors, the philosophers, and also those magazine and journal articles. And reading them, trying to comprehend and understand exactly what the main idea of each of those readings is, trying to understand or trying to feel for the tone of the author, and just trying to grasp the core arguments of those pieces. And you do this without any questions attached to these passages, just to be able to get you guys to think about how these passages, or the passages you would encounter on the MCAT, are structured, are laid out, right? It's sort of practice by immersion. You want to be able to read all the time so that when you need to read critically on the exam, you're already used to it. Next, we recommend that you set aside 2 to 3 hours a day for practicing passages, dedicated practice. And so this means reading the MCAT CARS passages tied to those list of questions that are associated with them, and then answering those questions, and also timing yourself as well, right? Because each passage you should take maybe anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes to read and also complete all the questions. So that's called dedicated practice. That's probably something that most of you are already doing, but just as a reminder, you need to continue that as well, along with intentional reading. And again, if you don't have 2 to 3 hours per day to dedicate to practicing, you could spread that, maybe 2 to 3 hours every 2 days, every 3 days, or you could set aside some time per week, right? The whole idea of this is not to get you guys to dedicate a certain number of hours towards doing these things, but just to make practice and reading consistent, so that you're doing it every day or every other day or every week, however much time you guys have able to spare towards practicing. You guys should be using that consistently. And then lastly, spending maybe half the amount of time that you use to practice to review your mistakes. And how you review your mistakes? Well, we have a system for that as well. So when you're doing the practice, you should answer all the questions that you definitively know the answer to. Maybe you feel that it's an easy question, or maybe you're able to instantly go back to the passage and locate the piece of evidence that gives you the answer, right? Or maybe you just feel that this is the right answer, and you have a gut feeling from the get-go that this is the right answer. You put it down, you're maybe 80 to 90% confident it is, you should answer that. The remaining questions that make you feel a little bit iffy, that maybe you've eliminated some of the obviously wrong choices and you're sort of stuck between two very, very close ones, so that's 50-50, you can flag those. You don't have to answer them the moment that you're on the question for the first time. And this helps you save time as well. So then when you go back and maybe you choose one of those two options that you were debating about, and then you go through all your passages in your practice session, you go through all the questions, you answer everything, then you go back and you review your questions. And ones that you answered incorrectly, there's going to be a reasoning attached to why you've answered it incorrectly, right? And so when you have that, you want to review that very, very focused, in a focused manner, very closely, and also log each of your mistakes in a spreadsheet, right? And try to log them under certain categories of mistakes. For example, if you're having trouble with main idea type questions, you might categorize a mistake that you made in a particular question under that column, right? True, false, inference type questions. And so you log all of those in a spreadsheet, and then on the right-hand side of your spreadsheet, have another column with the header, why did you get this wrong, right? And this is where you put the reasoning behind why you got it wrong. UWorld or AMC practice sets, they'll provide you with reasoning, very representative and very accurate reasoning to your actual CARS test that you'll receive on test day. And so read that, try to understand where it is that you went wrong, go back in your head and see what steps you took, what logical steps you took to get to your answer, and then identify the point which you made like a logical or justificational error to go the wrong direction. Put that down in the spreadsheet so then you can review them over and over again. And that also counts as practice, right? Repetition makes you remember things. And so this is also one of those strategies that might seem a little monotonous, might seem a little boring, but it works. If the whole idea of the CARS section on the MCAT, and the MCAT is in its entirety actually, is not about whether or not you understand. At the end of the day, it's not about whether you understand every nuance of every passage. It's about how many questions you can get right. And so if you're reviewing the questions that you get wrong over and over and over again, and you're exposing yourself over and over repetitively to your mistakes, right? And so the next time you encounter similar type questions, on your exam, your actual exam, or in your next full-length practice test, or in your next practice set, you'll remember that this is a question type of question that you got wrong before, and you remember where you went wrong in your reasoning. And so you repeatedly do this until you get to a point where you're comfortable with answering those similar question types efficiently and also accurately. Some final words about the CAR section in particular. This is something that's very important. It's a very high yield tip. And so put it in this first video, is to discard options with absolute terms like never or always, unless the passage explicitly supports them, because most of the time CARS favors nuanced answers. And so if you're looking at possible answer options, and some of them say that the author would never do X, Y, and Z, or would always support, A, B, and C, that is a red flag. You should most likely throw that out of your list of options that you're considering to be the right one, because those are extreme answers. And so most of the time CARS passages, and also the MCAT in general, doesn't really support those. Another high yield procedure or tip that we like to introduce is the idea of process of elimination. And so if you're really stuck on an answer, or you're really stuck on a question, and you can't formulate your own answer, or you don't really know which one is the correct one, you always eliminate the one or two that are obviously wrong, right? You could use strategies like discarding options, with absolute terms to do this. And once you have that, most of the time you'll be left with two possible answers. Those would probably be very close, but at least now you've improved your chances. If you're going to guess the answer at the very end, you've improved your chances at getting the correct answer from 1 out of 4 to 1 and 2, which is you've doubled your chances of getting it right? So that's a very useful process to learn, this process of elimination. And some parting thoughts before we move on to our next module is to be thoughtful in practice. And this goes back to intentionally reading literature, right? Reading with the goal of understanding the nuances of the piece, asking yourself what the main idea is, what the author's tone and attitude towards their subject matter is. And it's like focused practice. Practice as much as possible, right? And this goes back to how much time do you have? Sort of pace yourself and dedicate as much time as you can towards practice. And we can all get busy with work, with school, but every second that you have in your free time that you can spare towards practice, you should use it to practice. And this could be reading. This could be dedicated practice of passages and questions. Number 3, read all day intentionally. Goes back to being thoughtful in your practice. Number 4, review your mistakes religiously. So again, this idea of repetition, exposure to questions will allow you to be able to recognize them more efficiently and more accurately in the future so that you don't make the same mistakes over and over again. And last but not least, reach out to successful teachers. We at the Flourish Institute are always here to help. Outside of this resource, you can also reach out to your friends or family members who've taken the MCAT before and have scored well on cars. You could register for our community of like-minded individuals who are also prepping for the same test. You guys be able to share your thoughts and your troubles with each other as well in your practice. So that would help you to score high and achieve your goals for medical school admissions. So we'll see you in the next module. And just remember that we are always here to help.